Okay, hi everyone. So this set of notes is going to cover our final week that we have together here. Well, together, being online. But please let me know if there's any other pieces that you want to cover. I know it seems like such a short amount of time because it's a quick summer session, but that's okay. We've definitely got a lot done. And this couple last set of notes I'm going to go through with PowerPoints are going to talk a little bit more about looking at the business plan and crafting that, and some final thoughts and pieces about work and professionalism too. So I'm actually going to switch to our, I'm hiding right now again. I know does this ever get not awkward? I'm not sure. But here I am with it. So, this is the PowerPoint that's included, and, I'm really not a fan of PowerPoints, but this seems like a really good way to kind of lay out a lot of good basic information with me helping kind of narrate you going through it. So, I've kind of summed up some of our thoughts on work that we've all talked about and taken some of the really awesome points that you've all made this entire semester in your prompts and your discussion posts. And I wanted to kind of roll with that and just sum up these kind of parts about work and then talk about what it means to make a business plan. So we'll kind of go from there. So I'm going to stay hidden for a little bit and then I'll pop back in towards the end and we'll switch over with some notes. But some of your conclusions that you all came to, and we've talked a lot about this, is that work certainly means different things for different people. Right down from the basic definition to other parts of what the physical act means. And we all seem to use a different language and words to describe work. And mostly what you all very much have agreed on is that technology changes the way we do our work. But it doesn't necessarily change the true definition of what work is. So technology in some respects has made work a lot easier. Technology in some ways has made our work harder or more time consuming. But it doesn't change what we're actually doing, of what our true definitions of work might be. And this has also, I know for me, encouraged me to think about how the word has been used in the past. When my grandparents used to talk about work, it was such a physically demanding type of profession. It was also revered really well. I think today we've taken some of the parts about work that, the pride sort of parts out of it. We dread a lot of parts about work. But I know when my grandparents used to talk about it, they really talked about work with a sense of pride. So I think it's interesting to note, when did we go from that to something else? I also think of work as an attitude because certainly our attitude goes towards different tasks and whether or not we feel it's work or whether or not we call it work, because sometimes you can be at work but you don't feel like you're doing work. But sometimes then you certainly do on the other side of that feel like you're doing work. As we've talked about and as we looked at, a lot of cultures do not have the same attitudes towards work. So there's a lot of different values and social perceptions of what work is. And, it comes down to the fact that literally the definition of work can be anything. It could be a verb. It can be a noun. So that's kind of a cool part about it. I think you can open a lot of discussions. I've added a lot of podcasts for you as well. NPR has some great podcasts about the definitions of work and sort of the attitudes of work and how people have perceived work over the years. And I think it's a worthy conversation to have. So work could literally mean the labor of our bodies. It describes the activity, not the actual object. It truly used to be only associated with physical work, but I would say that's changed drastically, especially now over the years. And we have a lot of other oh my goodness, say that 10 times fast. We have a lot of other words that we associate with work. And I think of these as being pretty negative or heavy over the years, like toil and drudgery. We perceive these kind of with that effect. Now, we didn't read it for this class, but there's an awesome book that if you do want to read, it's pretty short. It's less than novel length. It's maybe 150 pages. It's called The Working Life by Joanne Sula. And it's a little bit older. It was maybe written in the late 90s, early 2000s. But I do love it because if you are interested in this area of talking about work, she talks a lot about the origins of the word job. And I'll link to her book if you want to do that for extra kind of, fun reading whenever you get time for that. But I like it because I've applied a lot of her thoughts. She always talked about how a job had a specific connection to work for pay and for profit. And sort of your affiliation of your job with personal gain or self-interest, that was often seen for its kind of negative uses. And it's really kind of interesting to go back and think about work in different centuries. In the 17th century, job was actually a slang term which meant theft or robbery, or it could mean that sort of a transaction in which public interest is sacrificed for the sake of private to party advantage. So I thought this was really interesting. Stocks were quote unquote jobbed by brokers and dealers. They didn't own them, but they made money from them. So it had a totally different effect, because today, job is literally the most general of terms that we talk about for paid work. And it's instrumental for pay. Without a job, you will not get paid unless you have, a different idea than maybe I've been doing these past years. So I think it's really cool to kind of go back and look at the origins of that. And I think it's a great question. Like, how did we get from the idea that we work to live to the idea that we live to work? Because I certainly think that we've gone from, okay, working to live and provide and sustain. But now that we're looking and working, we're saying, well, like, I live to go to work. And some of us can't live without our work, which could be both a blessing and a curse out of its own way. Because when Joanne Sula went back, she said for the ancient Greeks, work actually was a curse. And I love reading about ancient Greek mythology. It's one of my favorite parts. I know a lot of you do too. But Homer actually wrote that the gods hated humans and he made them toil out of spite. So if it wasn't for that, maybe we wouldn't even have work. And even the poet Hesiod wrote works in days. And he saw that there was absolutely no dignity in working. And of course, our favorite philosopher, Aristotle, he thought that work was something that we should, if possible, pass on to slaves. But he also believed that work done for profit could be its own curse. So these are, these origins are so completely different from what we've kind of come to in our present day. And Aristotle also distinguished between work that was done to produce things that we would use in the household and then work that was done for commercial gain. So he figured household work is good because you need that to stay alive, you need to stay clean, you need to stay healthy, but commercial work, that's totally not natural to humans. It's only carried out for what humans want, and that's not of a natural balance. He also felt that money should be used for exchange, not the breeding of more money. Well, that's a totally different mentality than we have now. And people who work for wealth, he felt, are never satisfied because the things that they want and the work that they do to get it are never ending. I think that can kind of reign true today, especially for some people. I think that sometimes there is no satisfaction, or we're constantly striving and working and for what end value, I really think. So a lot of the significance of work is influenced a lot by our culture's assumptions about what's real, how the world goes on, how much control we have. Because if you're looking back to ancient Greek, well, philosophers believe that a person's thoughts and ideas were more important than work. The intellect was so very much more value than just some meaningful toil in whatever you were going to be doing. Eastern cultures, especially, before Christ, the material world was thought very inferior and impermanent to the very much mental and spiritual worlds. But work wasn't really disdained. So I use the example of the Buddha here. Because people suffer because they thirst for material and physical pleasure. And the only way to rid suffering is to get rid of this thirst. And you use much more different values like love and compassion and mental discipline. So overall, without, oh my gosh, am I getting too deep for you here? The process of work is way more important than the product for a lot of these sort of instrumental, fundamental places of the origins of work. And I would hope that the process of work is more important than the product, even today. I know goals, I know job satisfaction, I know the end result is really, really important, but how much do we actually look at the process? And that's why I've loved sharing some of these TED Talks with you. I felt that some of the intellect and some of the ideas and just some of the ways of going about problem solving and the approach has just been so valuable to kind of add to our think tank. So each society has its own prejudice against work or certain types of work. And I refer here to what we call clean and dirty work. And Sula says that you can detach work ethic from its religious forms. There isn't much to recommend it, so why should people work hard if there's nothing in it for them, especially today? So that's why I wanted to definitely, last week when you guys touched upon work ethic and values, because a lot of these come out of either fairness and social obligation. You can see here where some of these come very much out of that. You can see also the one and the way to perform your work to the best of your abilities. This comes from, the Benedictines, like craftsmanship people. And the third concept, not to get too religious, going back to Calvin and to Luther, is that work is very moral and spiritual. Everyone's called by God to some form of work in life, and it's good. Even, it doesn't matter how sort of menial or regardless kind of the pay might be with that too. So I like to think of it as work and wealth and civic virtue. This is, in essence, like what's been passed on by the Puritans and Ben Franklin. How did we learn about all these ethics and values? Well, now we know about them through the stories that have been passed down, through textbooks, through sermons, through magazines. And so that's kind of what makes those pieces important. I find the value of going back and just looking at these changes, not only with talking about work, but with so many other things, just really, really interesting. And, I'm not quizzing you on this or anything like that. I just think a lot of these, ideas and concepts, and I'm going to flip back to me in a second here so you can see me. I think a lot of these ideas and concepts that I've laid here really kind of play a big role in how I've perceived work over the years, how I've approached challenges in the workplace, how I've talked about positive and negative experiences in the workplace, and to know that how did we get from such a drastic change in some of these pieces too that we're looking at and talking about work. And I think if we make a return to some of these values, we can help with some of the employee satisfaction, we can help with our own feelings on work, and maybe find a more passionate, fulfilling, monetarily for very much fulfilling, and also personally fulfilling kind of career path for all of you. And that's not saying you're going to have one career path. We've talked about this too. You could have many career paths, whatever makes up your sort of package of what you're going to be looking at. So I've really enjoyed sharing these thoughts with you, and I hope you've enjoyed them too. And our next set of notes is going to cover your final project, which is talking about the business plan.